Recognized Uncle Walker D01. Recognized Emily of Arden D12.
Hello, team. Thanks for joining us for episode 8 of Whelmed, the Young Justice Files Season 2. Welcome to the cave. My name is Rich, and I'm here with my not-a-sidekick, Emily.
Hey, everybody.
If you would like to get in touch with us, you can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files, on Facebook at Crashing the Mode, on our website, crashingthemode.com, on Tumblr at theyjfiles.tumblr.com, and at our email address, whelmedpodcast@gmail.com.
Quite the arsenal you've brought tonight, Mr. Harper.
You haven't seen the half of it, Luther.
Oh, I wasn't talking about the weaponry. I myself never go armed. No, the greatest arsenal any man can bring to the party consists of the resources of his own mind, his intelligence, his stratagems, his force of will. And you, my young friend, have all of those in spades.
And with that housekeeping out of the way, let's hand it over to Emily for...
Hello, Megan.
So the title of this week's episode is Satisfaction. The release date was September 29th of 2012, which is after an entire summer of hiatus because Young Justice had a great weekly schedule going for a little while there. The in-episode date is March 21st. The director was Doug Murphy, and the writer was Greg Wiseman.
And I can't believe it's taken me this long to realize that the voice of Lex Luthor, my favorite Lex Luthor of anything live or animated so far, was voiced by the actor Mark Rolston. And I'd seen the name a few times, and I thought, oh, I don't know that guy. But I totally know that guy. He played PFC Drake in Aliens, like the heavy weapons guy that hung out with Vasquez. And he was also Boggs in Shawshank Redemption, and he was like a demon in Supernatural. He's like cast as like the brute bad guys most of the time. And Emily and I were talking about this earlier, and I think Cameron and Eric both brought it up. The wonder of voice acting is...
You can be anything.
You can be anything you want. I'm sure this guy's like, can I please play an intellectual? And they're like, no, you play the brute guy with a broken nose, or whatever. And here he gets to play this brilliant intellectual mastermind. Like, I would never have placed his voice. Just amazing.
Yeah.
And that's it. Everybody else we get Kevin Michael Richardson returning again and a ton of the regular voice cast, but that's about it. And Alan Tudyk, who voices Green Arrow, also does the like one line and the giggling from Captain Cold. So that's pretty much it. I'm totally doomed, aren't I? Or something like that. It's totally Alan Tudyk.
Yes. Punch.
100%. All right, let's get on to the mission briefing.
Just in time for your next mission.
In our pre-credits scene, we get a little scene over at Royal Memorial Hospital where the original Roy Harper is recovering and trying to understand what he's missed over the last 8 years, because it's a lot. While the original Roy doesn't seem to hold any sort of grudge against his clone, the Roy Harper we've known, he's pretty mad at Oliver.
Yeah.
You might even say he's Angroy, because I like bad puns and I'm sorry.
Oh, our friend Pranks would be very proud.
Oliver and Roy the clone, because explaining this sequence is really hard when there's two Roys.
Is everyone I do a clone? Yes.
Oliver and clone Roy then have a conversation outside about how Ollie shouldn't be blaming himself for everything that's happened recently, because a lot has happened to all of his sidekicks recently.
Right.
But when they return to the original Roy's hospital room to talk to him, he's nowhere to be found because he's apparently escaped through the window.
Yes.
Yep.
Our post-credit scene is back over at Mount Justice. Connor and Mal let us know that Aquaman and his forces are searching everywhere for Calder and Lagan. We then cut to Robin, Beast Boy, Blue Beetle, and Impulse, all in their civilian identities, in an underground cave set up as a memorial to fallen heroes, including Artemis, Tula, Ted Cord, and another Robin, the name of which we never get. Maybe we should crash the mode on that one? I don't know. Everybody knows. It's the secret everyone knows. We'll crush the mode in that. Jaime and Bart then have a conversation about why there's no public memorial for these heroes. Jaime also admits to feeling a bit lost since he doesn't have a mentor. I love that line. You've been here, 5 minutes? And you've got 3 Flash mentors, one of them who feeds you chicken whizzies. Junk food. Bart decides to cheer him up by saying they should hang out, thus kicking off the start of their friendship.
Yep. We then cut over to a graveyard in Gotham City where Paula Croc is visiting Artemis's grave with Wally. She's taking the supposed death of her daughter incredibly hard, and although Wally seems to be feeling a bit guilty about it, he does not tell her that Artemis is still alive and working with Calder. And it turns out that Cheshire and Sportsmaster and tiny little Leon, who I love so much, are watching this scene from a distance. Jade vows to avenge her little sister's death by killing Aqualad, but Sportsmaster sees his daughter's death as an insult to his reputation and decides to go after Manta for retribution.
Back in Central City, the original Roy finds one of Oliver's old equipment caches. Inside, he's able to suit up in one of his old costumes, grab a few weapons before RA and GA, Red and Green Arrow, track him down. Just as they enter the hideout, Speedy escapes via Zeta Tube, but leaves a grenade in his wake to prevent them from following him and blowing up the tube. However, they're able to figure out, at least through the computer records, that the original Roy Zetaed to Metropolis to get revenge on Lex Luthor, where we cut to Metropolis and Roy fires a rocket launcher directly at Luthor's office, demolishing it in a fiery explosion. And we know Luthor was in it, too, along with Mercy at the time.
Yeah. Getting dark. No.
Yeah.
We were already dark. We were already really dark. So we then jump over to a much calmer scene at Ivytown University where Wendy Harris, one of the Bumblebee cheerleaders that we haven't seen since season 1, wishes Connor a happy birthday. Their conversation leads us to find out that apparently Wendy is the only one who remembered his birthday this year. But we then hard cut over to McGann, who's saying that she remembered too, as she and Zatanna are on their way to Raquel's bridal shower, a celebration at which Artemis is greatly missed.
Back in Metropolis, Lex has survived the blast by hiding under a very expensive personalized desk, apparently, and retrieves a briefcase from a safe before he and Mercy attempt to leave the building. Lex sends a squad of his bodyguards to where Speedy had been on top of the roof across from his office, but all they find is an abandoned rocket launcher. In the parking garage of LexCorp, Roy blows up Lex's car before he can escape and finally confronts the man who put him on ice 8 years ago. Back over at the bridal shower, Captain Cold's hilariously and sillily, is that a word? Attempts to rob a bank across the street. Sorry, I loved that shot. Is so good. Only to be like across the street from where Raquel is having her bridal shower along with 6 other massively powered superheroes. It's just ridiculous.
I feel like that entire subplot was just set up so they could do that one shot.
I know.
And I'm kind of okay with it.
Yeah, me too.
So then the parking garage fight between Roy and Mercy continues until Roy finally blows up her robotic arm and knocks her out. When he attempts to do the same thing to Luthor, Lex offers him a deal. If Roy presses the detonator, he'll be killed by a squad of snipers, but if he lets Lex walk away unharmed, he can live and also gets to keep what's in that mysterious briefcase that Lex Luthor took with him.
When Green and Red Arrow arrive a little while later, they assume the worst, only for young Roy to emerge from the smoke unharmed. Roy announces that he didn't kill Lex, yet anyway, and that he accepted Lex's gift, a weaponized cybernetic arm to replace the one that LexCorp took from him. Roy also announces that he's not Speedy anymore. He plans to go by the name Arsenal. More on that later. Crashing the mode. You had some mixed Aster on this one. I did not. So let's get on with that.
Superboy, are you alright?
I'm fine. Feeling the Aster.
Yeah, I was feeling a little iffy on this episode. Just because there's so many plot lines going on, it's a bit disjointed. Yeah. There's a lot of kind of unconnected stories. And before we started recording, I was thinking about this a little, and the closest thing we get to a connection between some of them is that people mention that Artemis is dead in like 3 of the 5 of these plot lines. But that's about it. It's kind of the only thing that connects them. And then the main plot is Roy having an action sequence, and that just didn't draw me in as much as maybe it was supposed to. Because Clone Roy is kind of a jerk. Not Clone Roy does not have all of my sympathy yet. I'm just like, ugh, calm down. Stop getting mad at everything. Stop blowing things up because of your teen angst. God.
Roy has always been a little broken. Like in the comics, like in the live action Arrow series, he's been a little broken. And so I don't have sympathy for Roy. Roy, as he is right now, is not, I hear what you're saying, but I don't necessarily blame him for his actions. Like blowing up the whole floor of a office without knowing whether or not innocent people are in it, but maybe he did. Maybe he scouted it out. I don't know. It's possible. It was empty. So, but still, lost 8 years of his life, replaced by a clone, felt like he was betrayed by his mentor, and he's already got anger issues. It's like, okay. But he definitely is like off the rails to the left of even the standard Clone Roy. I mean, the Clone Roy was angry, but he calmed down after he realized he was a clone and got some humility.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I understand Roy. I just don't agree with him. I understand
I hear you.
How and why and what he does in this episode. It just rubbed me the wrong way. I'm like, not into this. And also just the fact that
I hear you.
The last couple minutes of the episode are just one prolonged action sequence between 2 characters we don't know anything about, and in my case, didn't care that much about. So I'm just sitting there like, okay, you blew up another car. Cool. Get on with it. Because we don't know anything about original Roy, and Mercy is just Mercy. So I'm just like...
No, that's actually that's interesting. No, that's a really fair point, actually.
There's not much emotion in that. Like a lot of the other action sequences on the show, you're invested in what's happening. I felt kind of detached from all of that and didn't care that much. But that's just me. I understand how some people could just think it's awesome, and that's cool too, but it just wasn't for me.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying, but I think I was looking at it from a very different point of view, but I hear what you're saying. So I'm looking at it going, because I suspected that this new Roy was going to become Arsenal. Because in the comics, there's no clones, but there is Speedy becomes Red Arrow, becomes Arsenal. And so when they had the Red Arrow and they had this new character, I was like, is this one going to become Arsenal, and they're going to be 2 separate characters? I'm like, that's a really interesting take. And so as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, he is going to be Arsenal. He doesn't have just a bow. He's got like a pack full of stuff, right? And they're showing that he's clearly still like way more skilled than you would expect from God, how old was he supposed to have been? 14, right? And he's also doing all this with just a single arm. So part of me was like, okay, and I don't know if this is an unfair assessment, but I'm like, way to represent that having a disability like that, or what most people see as a disability like that, is not stopping you from doing what you feel you have to do, whether we agree with it or not. I was like, he is not being stopped by what most people would see as a disability.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Mercy has a long history in the animated series. She wasn't a character from the comics that I'm aware of. She started in Superman the animated series, and was really a cool character that we all loved, but she had speaking parts. And so I have a personal history with Mercy that is not self-contained in Young Justice, because we don't know anything about her, which is one of my points. One of the things I felt was super creepy in a good way about this is I had been wondering this whole time if Mercy was an android. Like, is she just a robot? I'm like, okay, is she a robot or a cyborg? And I'm like, well, she's not talking, and she's got this like arm that transforms, and she seems to be strong and fast. I'm like, she's just an android. But then she starts bleeding when she hits one of the cars, and she starts bleeding out of her mouth. And I'm like, oh God, like my perspective of her completely changed. Like, did she volunteer for this? And is she not talking because what? She's been like, what is this character's history now? Like, was she a bodyguard that got, hurt and damaged out in the field, and Lex, $6 million manned her? Like, like Bionic Woman'd her up to save her life, And did that affect her brain in some way? Is there a reason why she's mute? Like suddenly, so for me, I was watching this and like piecing, like for me, I had all this stuff I was thinking about while there were explosions going on. But when you look at it from just the self-contained aspect of the episode and the characters, you're 100% right. Like there's none of that is has been fed by any kind of narrative.
Yeah. But all of what you're saying is fascinating because I know nothing about Mercy. But also, even in this episode, she has a line. She doesn't have a line. Lex has a line that he says to her about how her only thing she cares about is protecting him or something like that. And he has to like push her off to do something. And I'm like, that has some really weird implications when you think about it too much. Yeah.
Yeah, but that happened, I think. No, it clearly happened before she started bleeding. So to me, I think that was when I walked into the fight, I was like, oh, she's programmed. Okay, it reinforced my theory that she was an android. But then she started bleeding, and then I was like, oh, God, that just pulled the rug out from under me. That tiny little trickle of blood out of her mouth made everything really, like, interesting and uncomfortable. Like, I really would like some answers about Mercy and who she is and what's going on with that. But I don't know. The other things in the fight, like the det cord maneuver with the loop around her arm and, like, all the stuff that he did there was really smart. Like he was fighting at full intellectual capacity, which they almost always do in Young Justice, and it was really impressive to watch. Which I think set the groundwork for who he becomes later once he gets once he gets the arm, and we see him later in the season. But
absolutely.
But you also made a really interesting point in here about Roy that I didn't think about the cloning process.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Speaking of Roy, we kind of, through context clues in this, kind of pick up on the fact that Roy can age. Because Roy Harper, that we know, clone Roy, looks much older than original Roy at this point, who's still like 16, I think. The YJ Wiki says he's like 15, 16, something like that. Yeah. And Roy is like 22 at this point, or around that. He's in his early 20s, early mid-20s. So I just thought that was interesting, considering that we've pointed out that Superboy can't age. So it's apparently something with trying to clone Kryptonians that makes them stay the same age forever, not just the clone thing.
Which is interesting because maybe if it's just the human clone combination DNA, does that mean that Match is aging? Or is it the Kryptonian part? That would be interesting.
We have a lot of questions about non-existent science in this episode.
That's right. What do you mean it's all real, Emily? It's real. Anyway, I have to tell you, I feel a little weird about the fact that, I don't know if it's because I'm a dad myself or whatnot, I feel weird that Wally was lying to Artemis's mom at the graveyard.
That scene kills me. It's so good.
It's a tough scene.
But like, it's a tough scene. Pains my heart. And it's not just that you're a dad, because I feel it too. I feel like this whole season is people making kind of iffy choices at every turn. But that scene is so hard. I don't, how do I say this? Shows don't always portray mourning very well. A lot of shows make it it just doesn't feel right. Whereas some of the understated ways that they show people dealing with the death of Artemis really hits home. Because when you're somebody who's lost people in your life, you know how that feels. Yeah. And you're watching it. And this is still a kid's cartoon, but even then you understand how that feels. And seeing the way she's reacting versus the way Jade and Sportsmaster are reacting, all of them feel very genuine. And all of them feel really painful at the same time. So yeah, I have problems with Wally lying to her too, but I have problems with Nightwing and everybody lying to everybody throughout this season. But I also, in that scene, I love that Jade cares. And I love that this show portrays the fact that despite them being on opposite sides, Cheshire and Artemis still love each other. They're still sisters. They still do really care about each other, even if they're both on separate sides of everything. And it's Cheshire saving Artemis in a fight. It's Artemis not killing her sister whenever she has a chance. But it's also this of her being like, I can't believe I lost my sister. I can't believe I wasn't able to protect her. because that's how Jade feels. And it's just like, you're an awesome sister. And then Sportsmaster is awful. Sportsmaster is
He's
an awful dad. Dad of the year right there.
He is.
Who cares if my
awful.
daughter's dead? I just
He is
want to get
awful.
back at the guy whose son killed her.
That's right.
Get out of here. Get out of here, Sportsmaster.
Yeah, I don't even know what else to say. So let's talk about Connor's birthday.
Connor's birthday. Despite this being kind of an iffy episode for me, it includes that graveyard scene that I do really like, and it includes the birthday party conversation that just melts my heart every single time, because we know I care about people caring about each other. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. I really like that scene, and I like everything it brings up.
I like Wendy coming back. There's something through the whole season, it's just this undertow of the characters that they were friends with in high school have continued to be friends with them. You know, that history is there, and you feel that history of the characters from the first season. Absolutely. Even when they're relatively minor supporting cast characters like Wendy and Marvin, and like they have different kinds of friendships, right? Clearly Wendy does not know that he's Superboy, and Superboy is not public.
Even though he's wearing his shirt.
Mal, he's even wearing a shirt in public, but like he's still clearly not a public figure, right? Nobody knows that he does any of that after years, which is impressive. But then Mal takes that middle ground step and kind of joins the team and becomes their logistics coordinator. And then Karen goes full bore. Like she's working with the Atom, right? Professor Palmer is the Atom. Yeah. And I'm interested to hear about how they folded that in. Like, did she start working for Palmer and then she also has gear and equipment? We never get an answer as to whether or not, because the Atom's ability to shrink is based on technology. It's based on a belt that he uses. But we never get an answer as to whether or not Karen's powers are natural, like having to do with the metagene, and she was exposed to the white dwarf matter and the technology that Palmer was using. Like, are they natural powers, or is she using some kind of tech? I'm not sure. I don't think we ever get that answer.
Yeah. See, this episode is just bringing up so many questions. You and me are just being like, okay, but wait, how? At every single turn.
Yeah. But they're not bad questions. They're more
True.
just like, because you don't need to know the answers to make anything make sense. It's just, it makes that, to me, it gives you that continued feeling that Young Justice does so well of the depth. There's so much going on everywhere, and that life moves forward in the storyline even when the characters aren't directly involved with it, which makes it feel like a rich, big universe, which I, of course, love.
With that whole birthday party conversation, I really do love that it gives us a look at the 5 season, gives us a look at the 5 years gap, not 5 seasons, only 2 seasons.
You're right.
That 5-year gap, because we don't hear much about that. Like throughout the whole show, we don't hear much about 5 years of time that we missed. But just this little conversation gives us an insight into that and their relationship, and into Connor and how he's just a sweet, adorable boyfriend. And I love him so much. I just want to give Connor a hug. Poor boy. And that great cut between him saying nobody remembered my birthday to McGann saying it's Connor's birthday gets me every time, because I remember watching that scene the first time and I'm like, you're telling me Miss Marcia did not remember her boyfriend's birthday? Are you really okay, good. I feel vindicated.
When I was rewatching this I saw that scene and I was thinking of you.
Because we've talked about Neverland before. That one scene spawned a whole ship. And on some level, kind of like that scene, both I love that scene, and the first time through, I kind of hated that scene because I, like a lot of people, assumed that they were gonna put Connor and Wendy together, and I was like, no, you can't do that. That's not right. No.
It seemed perfectly natural to me. I would have been happy with it. I would have been just fine. Because I want Connor to be happy, and I'm not convinced. I've said it before. I'm still not convinced that I want them to get back together, because I am not okay with the things that she did. And Wendy's a nice person.
True, but I want a comic book miniseries. I want a comic book miniseries where Superboy and Miss Martian just talk about their issues and rebuild their lives. That's what I want. How do I make that happen? Because I agree, I don't want them to just get thrown back together. I want them to talk about things.
Yeah.
This is
I'm
what I
shocked.
like. But moving on from Emily rants about Super Martian into eternity.
There's something else. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but there's something that drives me nuts, and I'm really hoping that one of our listeners can help me with this, which is this Mysteries of Adolfo book that keeps showing up. I have
I
not
have so
been
many
able to...
questions.
For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Superboy is reading a book called The Mysteries of Adolfo on the bench when Wendy shows up. And I saw the book, and I was like, that's interesting. And then I looked up the book. I don't get it.
It's a gothic romance novel, and I'm so confused.
But also, back in, what was it, Homefront?
Yeah,
where
it's
Robin and
Homefront.
Artemis are running away from the Reds in the first season. The Mysteries of Adolfo is the book that Robin pulls for the gate to open up for the secret passage. Now, okay, so it's a gothic romance. That might make sense if it was the Batcave, right? But does anybody know what this book is? Like, what does this mean? Like, I mean, I get that Greg is like and he wrote this, right? So I get that he's like a Shakespeare fan or something, but this is like a favorite book of his. Like, I don't know. I gotta ask him if I can get him cornered. It's
Dear
driving me
Greg
nuts.
Wiseman, explain.
Adolfo, go.
'Cause
Yeah, when he finally gets freed up for an interview, I'm cornering him on Adolfo.
please. Because I'm one of those people who loves to see what characters are reading in any given scene, because that's fun and I'm an English nerd. But it's like generally it ties into what's happening somehow.
I know, right?
So
Yeah.
why do this? Because you'd have to specifically tell people this is the name that I want on the book because it's animation. So I just want to know.
Yeah, crazy. All right, so definitely let us know. Get on the Twitter, email us, somebody tell us what this is all about. But let's change gears a little bit. There's a couple other little things I wanted to mention too that I thought were funny, weird in one case, which is so the security guard that calls Mr. Luther, "Hey, Mr. Luther, are you okay?" Like after he gets blown up, he's got that weird kind of Mr. Luther
Cartoon Brooklyn accent.
Yeah, the Brooklyn accent, right? Well, that character is Otis, right? He says, "Otis, do me a favor. There's an assassin, blah, blah, blah." Otis was the name of Lex Luthor's henchman in the original 1977 Superman movie, and that's what he sounded like. So basically they took that character who played him? Ned Beatty? Yeah, Ned Beatty. So Ned Beatty played him, and that's exactly what he sounded like. So I thought that was kind of a cute nod to, pretty good movie. There's some things about it that don't hold up over time, but man, when I was a kid, I loved that movie. But also Luther never lies through this entire episode. Never tells a lie, never says an untruth, answers questions directly, never does anything directly arguable or untrustworthy. Like, he compliments Roy. All of this makes me horrifyingly uncomfortable in the best way. I'm going to dive into this a little more in the Canary Debrief, though. So,
Before, I just want to say that Luther also has one of the best lines in this episode, which is, "And that's why I have a customized desk." Because he says it so calmly after his entire office blows up. It's up there with Connor just calmly saying that he's 6 years old, because that also gets me every single time.
Right. That's pretty funny.
Which
Yeah.
leads me to one last point I want to make before we go into the Canary Debrief.
Yeah,
Because
do
I
it.
checked this when I was rewatching the episode. The in-episode date is March 21st, I think we said earlier, which is exactly 16 weeks before July 4th, which is the day that they found Superboy and broke him out. So someone apparently did the math at some point to figure out what Superboy's actual real birthday would be, and that's the day they celebrate it. And that makes me so happy on so many levels.
Yeah.
It's just cute. It's that attention to detail. They could have picked any day, but they're like, no, let's check. Let's figure this out.
This is the day. Yeah, it's those details. All right, let's talk about villains.
Stick around. Class is in session.
All right, guys, mustache twirling villains or evil for evil's sake, it almost never, ever works. I mean, I would have said it never works, but like the Joker in The Dark Knight was just chaos personified, and it ended up working out. But Joker's a bit of an exception that proves the rule. They had to address it specifically because Bruce in that movie wanted to have him make sense, and Alfred explains, that whole, line, some men just want to watch the world burn. Okay, that's cool, but that does not make a good villain. Luther in this episode continues to be horrifying. We get even more evidence that all he wants to do is give people what they want. He's full of presence and charisma, and there's only 1 or 2 times in the entire show where we catch him blatantly lying about something or going back on something that he had said. The implications of his charisma gaining him long-term power, like the Malaysia Summit in the first season, that's great. That's who he is. But in this episode, he literally uses his charisma, planning, and mentality to save his own life. Like, many times, particularly in like the 70s and 80s, Luther got turned into basically an evil Iron Man. He was given powered armor and all this stuff because the writers were just putting him toe-to-toe with Superman, and they couldn't figure out how to make this normal human with a high intellect be a threat to Superman. So they gave him powered armor. This villain is something that should be used as an archetype for, as far as I'm concerned, a huge bank of villainous types. The best villains should be the heroes of their own story. You've probably heard me say that on the podcast, and you've probably heard it said at any number of writers' conferences or on writers' podcasts. They should believe that what they are doing is what they think is right. The best villains even make us wonder if they're right. Though I don't agree with Luther, and we know he's antagonistic to things like personal freedom-ish, sort of, it's hard to directly argue against any specific statement he makes. And even when Roy in the first season corners him, or Superboy corners him, he just says, "Yep, you're right. It's all true. Everything you said is true." He gives you nothing to fight against, nothing to get angry at, nothing to catch him in. He's so slippery in that way. That is a horrifying villain. When you know that they're evil, you know what they're doing is wrong, but you can't figure out how to tell anyone about it, even yourself. Oh, all right. Let's get into crashing the mode. We got a couple things going on in that.
Tell us something we don't know yet.
Sorry, BB. We can't risk altering the time stream. We do that, we're all feeling the mode.
Okay, everyone. Remember that in Crashing the Mode, we're talking about spoilers for this episode, for the rest of the series, and for the DC universe. If you are spoiler wary, please consider this your warning.
8 episodes into the season, and we finally remembered to put the spoiler warning back on. Whoops!
Sorry, Caleb. You were going to say something earlier that I decided to couch in Crashing the Mode. I don't know if it needed to be, but there isn't much mode to crash here, so let's do that.
So, that grotto scene, that hologram grotto scene where we got everybody who's dead. There is a Robin hologram, and they never name him, but people who know comics know that that's Jason Todd, or is presumably Jason Todd. And knowing that the first time through, when I was little tiny me watching the show, weirdly enough, felt like a badge of honor watching the show and being like, oh my god, that's Jason Todd. I know that's Jason Todd. Because despite the fact that everyone knows that's Jason Todd, I didn't know that everyone knew that was Jason Todd. So I felt special because I was learning all the DC history back then, and I was like, I know about that thing.
Yeah.
Everyone knew about the thing. I was late to the party, but I felt special.
I'm glad you felt special, but not everyone knew about the thing, for sure. We're running into people now, still, who are listening to our podcast and watching the show for the first time, along with us, and they don't know anything about the comics. And he never, ever gets mentioned. We see that hologram a couple times during this season, and he never gets mentioned. If you've gotten this far with us and you don't know who Jason Todd is, and you want to know his story and have that kind of general arc spoiled, go watch the Brandon Vietti directed Batman Under the Red Hood. It is a brutal movie. Keep that in mind. Brutal. Because Jason Todd dies. Obviously, because we see him as his hologram.
Violently.
How he dies is pretty brutal. but it is excellent. Neil Patrick Harris as Nightwing, Bruce Greenwood, the voice of Batman here in Young Justice, does the voice for Batman in that, which is, I think, probably one of the reasons they brought him into this. 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's like a 95% or 96% watcher rating. It's outrageous. Great movie. Go watch it and then tell Brandon Vietti that you love it. Yeah, I agree with you. Even I was excited when I saw it, and as probably everybody knows now, I voted to have him killed back in the day.
Which is one of those people.
I know, it's terrible. But, and again, the reason was because he wasn't written well, and they didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't great. Now, when he's come back as Red Hood, and you got Judd Winnick, who had written the Under the Red Hood miniseries that brought him back, he's now a great character, and he's come into his own, and I would love to see him in a future season.
At around this time when the show was on, I think it was during the hiatus. I think it was when it happened. I was at a con and someone made a Ghost of Jason Todd joke during a panel, and like half the audience booed and someone shouted too soon, and the guy on stage was like, it's been what, like 40 years? Like, chill, guys. It happened. Calm down.
Yeah.
And so that amuses me.
Yeah.
People are still mad.
I think people are retroactively mad. That's my opinion. My opinion is people like Jason Todd now and can't understand how people would have voted to have him dead back in the day. I'm not entirely convinced you had read anything with him back in the day. He was terrible. And I'm sure we will get people saying I loved him, he was my favorite Robin, and I can't believe he died. Maybe, but he wasn't mine. Or close to 11,000 other people's. Anyway, let's skip on to Arsenal.
Let's move on from poor dead Jason Todd.
To poor thought was dead Roy. Anyway, so as I mentioned earlier, in the comics, there's no clone of Roy that I'm aware of. And so Speedy kind of evolves into Red Arrow and then evolves into this character of Arsenal. He has an arm in the comic and that kind of thing. This is all new, the way they took this version of him. But the thing that's interesting and couches in Crashing the Mode is that Arsenal is in the 2003 run of the comic Outsiders. The team of the Outsiders is gathered and led by Arsenal, which we kind of get a little nod to later in this season when Ty and Sam and Ed and Virgil save the team from the World and work side by side with Roy, who almost joins up with them until he realizes that, they've been working for Lex and blah, 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 but they've still kind of got a connection there. And since the next season is Young Justice Outsiders and it's about metahumans weapon trafficking, where else is my head supposed to go, right? So I don't know. We'll see what happens. And you had a point about Red Arrow too that you said. Didn't you say you read something somewhere about Red Arrow, Roy leaving the hero biz?
A few episodes ago, I think I mentioned it. And the place that I got that from, I think, is the Ask Greg website that Greg Wiseman does, where he answers people's questions. And I didn't find it. I'll have to find it at some point so we can share it somewhere, but I'm pretty darn sure there was one where somebody asked something about Red Arrow at the end of season 2 about clone Roy, because now there's 2 Roys, and so we have to separate them, and it's going to be such a difficult thing. But Red Arrow Roy, apparently, according to Greg, after season 2 and everything that happens with that, takes a step back from the League and from superheroing because he has a family now, and it makes me smile.
Nice.
But yeah.
Yeah. So if he comes back into the scene, if we do have another time, Greg has said there is a time jump. There will be a time jump. How long the time jump is, we don't know. Could be 6 months, could be a year. I doubt it'll be like a 5-year jump. But,
Greg
if it does end up being,
tricky.
I know. If it does end up being a 2 or 3 year jump, then Leanne will be old enough to be getting daycare and whatever, doing something. And Roy may go back out in the field. I don't know. Or the original Roy Arsenal has plenty of training, and now with the time jump would have a couple of years more training, or whatever the time jump is. He could be leading this team, the team of Ty and Sam and Ed and Virgil and whoever else that they find, right? So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens there. All right, I think we can consider that mode successfully crashed. Why don't we move on to a little fan service? You got something for us that is super adorable.
I've admired your stance on animal rights for years.
This week's fan service, an awesome artist on Tumblr that I stumbled across called MKO, is how I'm going to say her name, who does a bunch of awesome little Young Justice fan art. Has some fun, cute, adorable, silly things up there, some serious things too. But she has a great art piece that I really liked that's been up for a little while. That's basically for the Buy YJ Comics on Comixology campaign, and it's the whole team reading different issues of the comic that are focused on them, and it's really cute. They're all just like lounging around reading comics.
That's funny.
But she's got a bunch of great stuff up there.
There's a lot of Wally and Artemis stuff that's super cute.
Yeah. There's a comic that's really funny with the two of them.
Yeah. We won't spoil it. You should watch. It's just like a 3-panel thing, but it's great. So well done, MKO. So pop over to the links. We'll have the links in the show notes. So pop over there and take a look and let them know how much you enjoy their stuff. Well, I think we can wrap up this mission and head out of the cave. Remember, the best way to support the show is with 5-star reviews on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. I will also mention that Neil has just let us know that we have crossed about 3,300 listeners, or at least unique downloads or whatever.
Woo.
Yeah, we are super grateful for that. But having said that, we only have about 30 ratings and reviews on iTunes. If we could get 10% of those of you listening going on to iTunes and giving us a 5-star rating or review, it would be huge. We get 300 5-star ratings or reviews on iTunes. It would push us up in the ratings enormously. So if you haven't yet, please consider popping over. You don't have to write a whole review. Just click 5 stars and move on with your day. It takes seconds and is a huge help to us.
And please continue to hashtag keep binging YJ and hashtag buy YJ Comics on Comixology. You can also now use hashtag Young Justice Outsiders when talking about season 3. And if you want to help us get more episodes, more Secret Origins, more actual play podcasts, like the one that just came out a little bit, by the time this comes out, you guys will have heard it. It's cool. If you want more of that, Patreon. So just please consider supporting us on Patreon if you want more stuff like that. For just a few dollars a month, you can help us do even more with the show while getting some great rewards for yourself. And remember,
stay whelmed, everyone.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our hosts are Rich Howard and Emily Booza. Our editor and producer is Neil Powell. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours, under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.